emergency deep clean. 4 rigs, 6 techs, lift rental, drums of biofoam, hydrant permit, total $48,000.
You can rent stock photos. You can borrow a truck. You can't borrow gravity.
If water moved, the meter would speak. It didn't. The photos did, but in someone else's neighborhood.
It started with a silence so clean it squeaked, the kind left behind when someone swears machines screamed all night, and yet not a single leaf looks disturbed. The board's Friday dusk blast named it an emergency deep clean, a liability fire drill with 4 rigs, 6 techs, a lift rental, drums of biofoam, and a hydrant permit that made the invoice read like a movie budget more than maintenance. Morning broke over concrete that refused to play along. The clubhouse steps still wore last week's coffee crescent. The spider thread from mailbox to lamppost rang intact in silver. The edges where damp should have climbed the walls sat pale and dusty. The curb numbers carried their familiar soft shadow font, unbothered by any rinse. The neighborhood, famous for reporting leaf blowers as if they were thunder, had posted nothing overnight. Habit and curiosity shoved me to the city's water portal, a graphite check for sprinklers and pool refills, and the bars for the exact window of the supposed wash lay flat as a horizon, straight zeros, while the city's weekly bulletin added a quiet insult. Pressure in our zone had been throttled for valve maintenance through the night. A hydrant nearby still wore its tamper cap unmarked, the kind of stiff hat that keeps score, and the vendor's website, cheerfully linked on the invoice, greeted me with a hero image that flaunted Mediterranean tiles our clubhouse does not own, a neat curb with a thin serif stencil our painter would never touch, and a queen palm we have never planted. Politeness is cheap and effective, so I asked for time-stamped work photos, gate logs, and the hydrant permit copy. The reply arrived in minutes, too glossy, too fast, a carousel of perfect angles that somehow sidestepped every landmark that would have made the Mars. The silence that had smelled like dawn shifted into something else, a hush that felt staged. The photos cracked wherever light touched them. Their file names insisted on midnight heroics, but the metadata whispered a different month and an older year. And on one frame, a faint watermark ghost clung to a corner like a smudge that wouldn't scrub out. Reverse searches turned the carousel into a trail of souvenirs, an ad campaign from years ago in a different county, a Texas property blog, a vendor Instagram that had never known our sidewalks. Gate logs, the neighborhood's sleepy diary, recorded pizza, joggers, and the squeak of a regular dog walker's shoes, but none of the trucks the invoice bragged about. The management portal held a quieter blow. The $48,000 had been wired 3 days before the announcement, a pre-approval stamped with the treasurer's code, the vendor profile created 2 weeks earlier, flagged by the system as a new payee over threshold, the warning acknowledged and waived by the same hand in the same minute. The W-9 matched a dissolved nonprofit's tax ID in another county. The LLC registry dated the company at 60 days old and stashed its address inside a strip mall mailbox unit. I stacked screenshots, water logs, registry pulls, and a calm narrative into a tidy packet, because volume isn't the point, sequence is. The tone stayed neutral, receipts instead of outrage, and I sent it to the board, the management company, and the independent auditors with the ombudsman on copy. The neighborhood's air changed again, like a hallway when someone opens a back door, and across phones and porches, the story that had looked like cleanup started to look like a costume. Auditors move like rain, steady and uninterested in drama, and their first sweep connected the phantom wash to a small constellation of other emergencies that did not survive daylight. There was storm cleanup on a day the weather app still keeps blue and quiet, a termite tent that had never earned a city permit, a mailbox repaint paid twice in a single quarter while flakes still clung to the boxes, and a fountain pump overhaul our actual vendor denied because the serial plate on ours has never traveled. The money did what bad money does, wired fast into a new account that rinsed it toward a second bank and then shaved it into withdrawals like a magician trying to empty a hat. The vendor's domain registration wore privacy, but an early login came from the Clubhouse network during a late-night hour a week before the invoice, which doesn't read like coincidence to anyone who counts for a living. A junior bookkeeper at the management company had flagged the treasurer months earlier for bypassing dual approval and had been soothed by the board president with compliments about efficiency, a word that will rot anything if you let it sit next to cash too long. The city added a footnote of its own. Valve maintenance had throttled pressure that night, and alarm triggers would have chirped if someone had tried to pull hundreds of gallons. Those logs were as flat as our sidewalks. The common meter's tamper tag was untouched, the kind of detail that never struts, but never lies. An unsigned letter arrived in my mailbox in a font that likes to pretend it passed the bar, calling me names without a masthead, and I filed it beside the rest of the paper and did not alter my breathing. A neighbor's Ring camera caught the treasurer ferrying banker boxes from the clubhouse after dusk into a trunk. Maybe they were newsletters, like the later email claimed, but the timing lay on the night like too much perfume. The auditors asked for the accounting file's audit trail export and for view-only bank access, and the board froze the treasurer's signing authority. The management company slid folders across the table in a quiet hurry. At dawn, a new email announced a supplemental wash to finish missed areas due to city pressure loss, a backfill written like a favor, and the shape of a cover-up stepped out from behind the painted scenery. If you mean to turn fiction into pavement, you have to fight physics, and the neighborhood is good at noticing what concrete does and does not do. Chalk dust brushed along curb edges waited to smear under real surface spinners. A clean sliver of tape crossed the clubhouse spigot where a hand would need to grip. A motion camera faced the apron where portable lights would bloom, and the city watched its valve logs without blinking. The night breathed evenly until an unmarked box truck rolled in behind a sedan with quietly familiar plates. Lamps threw hard cones of light onto empty concrete. Jugs sloshed. A battery sprayer misted a thin lace of foam. A leaf blower feathered the edges into false arcs that wanted to read like fan patterns. Photos snapped in quick bursts at angles that avoided our mascot oak, the cracked tile by the clubhouse door, the dent in the rail. When morning came, it spoke in the language of physics. Chalk lines intact, tape unbroken, meter bars still flat, puddles pooled wrong on slopes that always drain left, dry spots where canopy usually shields wet. A kid on a scooter said the unsophisticated truth by dragging a wheel through a shallow patch and calling it wet. Neighbors did what neighbors do when a lie parks under a streetlight. The truck's path stitched itself across Ring doorbells like a constellation. The management company cut ties with a former regional rep's cousin, whose phone number trailed the sedan, and the auditors forwarded a package of timestamps to the bank and to the district attorney's intake desk, where the phrase, attempted cover-up, is spare and untheatrical and somehow heavier than the neighborhood's gossip ever sounds out loud. The ghost that wanted to become real had managed to only drag its sheet through a puddle. Banks are slow, not sleepy, and while the case file thickened, the fraud unit's hand reached into the stream and pulled most of the wire back before it broke down into withdrawals. The fidelity bond stepped into the gap for the remainder as if it had been waiting precisely for this invoice all along. The auditor's final report laid out a quilt of dates, IP addresses, bank IDs, and registry matches, and the picture they made did not invite debate. The treasurer resigned with a letter that read like a magician blaming the audience for blinking, a performance that fell away under the weight of timestamps and the visible sag of a personal credit balance that tidily dipped 2 days after each vendor payment cleared. A for sale sign planted itself in his yard in the next breath, the kind of punctuation the neighborhood watches with something slantwise, not because it forgives, but because lives still have to pack. The lamp the auditors held found smaller leaks too, daisy-chain vendors with toolshed names, mailbox store addresses, and small tickets that tried to blend in. One thread led to the board president's cousin, a landscaping consultant who had written invoices that our soil never wore. An anonymous manila envelope appeared on my porch with printouts and a USB taped to its belly, a cache of exported messages that diagrammed nudges about urgency and liability at hours when common sense softens. The city added fines for attempted hydrant use, and the management company was replaced with one that turns the ledger lights on by default and watermark locks invoice images with geotags and visible landmarks in frame. A special meeting swapped outrage for plumbing, freezing approvals, inviting independent eyes into a quarterly routine, and committing to policies that do not bend for charisma or Friday evening urgency. Fallout didn't explode, it rearranged the room. The bank posted the last reversal, the fidelity bond wired the difference, the board issued a dues credit because even when dollars returned, trust needs deposits. A special election took 2 chairs and filled them with neighbors who prefer the chemical calm of receipts over the theater of vibes. The open check register went live behind a QR code taped inside the clubhouse. Geotagged, time-stamped images are now stapled to every payment, and any future emergency purchase must be signed by an insurer, a city office, or a licensed contractor who risks more than embarrassment if they write fiction. The district attorney folded the case under statute numbers that read like coordinates and stitched a restitution plan into the outcome. Probation lines did what handcuffs rarely do in neighborhoods, which is to quietly prevent repetition. The city used our file in a workshop on water access and fraud, a curious kind of fame that turns hindsight into guardrails. And then the sound everyone had expected from the start finally arrived in honest daylight. Rigs churning, water arcing in clean fans, concrete blooming a shade lighter in slow, satisfying swaths, while kids steered scooters through the runoff and parents traded shorthand about valves and EXIF data in chalk dust. The ground, consulted too late the first time, had the last word anyway. Months later, the story lives where it should, in routines that no longer feel like punishment. The watchdog thrill is gone, boredom has taken the chair, which is what safety looks like when it stops performing. I still walk past the clubhouse and clock the small truths. The gum flecks surrendered, the curb-shadowed algae gone, the cracked tile by the door unchanged enough to anchor any future photo check. The open ledger ticks along like a creek where you can see the bottom. The neighborhood has a new folk tale to hand to new owners between cookie plates and pool key forms, a caution wrapped around a simple method. When someone invoices you for noise, listen for silence. When they tell you water moved, ask the meter. When they frame urgency as immunity, ask the concrete. The phantom that once tried to rent a costume from stock photos left with less than it came for and a name we use now as shorthand. Not for scandal, but for the way a block can learn to hear itself. And if there is a quiet twist left, it belongs to the unglamorous rectangle of digits in the meter box, which never wanted to be a protagonist but ended up a witness anyway. Carrying its flat lines with the same unblinking patience it gives the spike of a real wash. A reminder that the ground will prove the truth if you give it light and time and the courtesy of looking down.